Sarah is a senior learning advisor at Allstate with 7 years in L&D and with a background in higher education and HR consulting. She brings expertise in philosophy, sociology, and career readiness. She focuses on inclusive learner-centered design and explores the intersection of classical educational theory and modern instructional design. Sarah has spoken with TLDC before. Sarah, was it the last AIDC that you were here, or I can't recall exactly?
It was the Women in L&D conference
That's
for
right. That's right.
2025. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So everybody, please welcome Sarah Syed to the event. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hide myself from the screen and let you take over.
Thanks. Thanks, as always, the gracious introductions. I'm excited to be with you here today. I'm excited to explore what it means to truly design for both thinking and access. So, as Lewis mentioned, my name is Sarah. My pronouns are she and her. I serve as a senior global learning advisor. And for those who find visual descriptions helpful, I'm a white woman in my mid 30s with long blonde hair that's pulled back. I'm wearing glasses and a dark blue long sleeve blouse, and I'm also wearing headphones. I'm joining from Elmhurst, Illinois. I saw a few neighbors there in the chat. It's a western suburb of Chicago. These are the traditional lands of the Ho-Chunk, the Potawatomi, Kickapoo, Miamia, and the Peoria people. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to live and work on these lands. So throughout this session, there is a chat, as you guys are aware, because you've introduced yourself. I'll ask for a little bit of engagement, a little bit of input through the chat for questions. There's a Q&A section as well for you to sort of start populating your questions. And then at the end, we'll have time to get to those. So before we dive into the topic, I want to ask a quick question. And really, what do you think about when you think about accessibility in learning design? So what kinds of things come to mind? Couple of ways to engage. You can share your thoughts in the chat, as I said, or you can capture them for yourself and reflect on them as we advance through the session. So I'll give a couple of moments to go through the chat. Yes, color contrast ratios, big one. I also think about closed captions and transcripts, right? Alt text. I think I said it right as Jennifer typed it. I think of WCAG, right? The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Screen readers, so that assistive technology. Headings, yeah, making sure that even your the documents, PDFs and Word documents have appropriate headings and subheadings so that the assistive technology can read it. Keyboard only, audio description. So as learning professionals, we're committed, right, to creating inclusive and equitable experiences. And so we naturally focus on these things that we just mentioned in the chat, needing to convince others why it's a must. That's a big one. But we also think about, like the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Standards, different frameworks like UDL framework. These are critical, no doubt. They're absolutely critical. And there are many experts that do a lot of research in these areas, do a lot of talks, even some that are part of this conference as well. But I want to highlight today another powerful way of looking at accessibility that sits at the intersection of effective learning and accessibility, and that's metacognitive instructional practices. So how do we create education that sort of invokes and enables metacognitive thought, and talk about how those are sort of a launch pad into these more technical accessibility guidelines and standards and ways in which we should be designing. So in this session, particularly, we're going to look at strategies like goal setting, self-assessment, think aloud activities, reflective questioning, not only to strengthen critical thinking and learner agency, right, as we know these activities do, but also so that we can contribute meaningfully to accessibility. So we can have use cases, right, Bobby, to convince others why it's a must. And my hope is that these insights will inspire you to reflect on the learning environments that you're shaping and then use that reflection as a springboard to deepen your engagement with the more technical aspects of inclusive design, because we know they can be, for those of you that are just now getting in the accessibility space or just now maybe convincing your teams that it's necessary, it can be overwhelming, the technical side of it. So I want to sort of talk about this in a way that makes it a little more accessible, right? So quick agenda. We're going to explore how metacognitive design can enhance transparency, support complex thinking, create flexible pathways. Whether you're in a classroom environment, whether all of your learning is digital or you're in a corporate training environment, we'll start by unpacking what metacognition is. Then we'll look at UDL principles, WCAG guidelines, and align those with the metacognitive practices that we'll explore. And then we'll shift into some more practical strategies, like what do those activities look like and how do I implement them in live sessions or e-learnings or simulations. That way, you sort of have a conceptual understanding of how this really is relevant and relates to your work. And then finally, we'll just wrap up with some takeaways. I'll leave you, I'm going to email a guide, a toolkit type guide to Luis, and he'll make sure that you guys have it available after the conference concludes, but hopefully that'll help you to implement in your own practice. So before we get to our next session, I just want to ask everybody, what do you hope to get out of this session? Maybe you want some new strategies. Maybe you saw the word metacognition and you're like, ooh, I want to learn about that. Maybe it's your lunchtime and you just want some passive engagement while you have your sandwich. Whatever it is, take a moment to reflect on what your goal is for this session. We'll check back later. If it feels like too much too soon, you're like, what do you mean? You just went through the agenda. I have no idea what to expect at this point. Skip it for now. Revisit it later when you feel like you're ready to answer. But I'd love to hear what you all are looking forward to getting out of this session. So I'll give you about a little bit of time, 20, 30 seconds to sort of think about that. Notate it if you'd like before we move to the next section. Right. Got Catherine, Bridget. All right. So for those of you who maybe haven't studied metacognition or thought about it or heard the term, it's essentially our ability to think about and regulate our own thinking. And it's sort of a foundational concept that has been recognized as being essential for effective learning. The concept was introduced in the 1970s, so it's deeply rooted in some traditional learning theories, but it continues to shape modern instructional design. And then what I'll talk about today is how we advance accessibility as well. So when you think about foundational theories like cognitive development theory, which emphasizes that reflective thinking in the formal and operational stage of learning is essential. Constructivism, right? Highlighting internal dialogue and meaning making. That is what makes learning effective. And more psychological theories, right? Like social cognitive theory, where self-regulation and strategic thinking, those things have to be true in order for learning to occur. And then when we look at more, I guess more modern, not necessarily modern, but I know we still use Bloom's taxonomy, right? So those higher level skills like analysis and evaluation, those rely very heavily on metacognitive insight. And then for adult learners in particular, metacognition is what drives self-directed and goal-oriented mindsets that adult learners traditionally need to thrive, especially if you're in an environment where it's not, the education may not entirely be compliance based, and you maybe can't force your adult learners to engage in it. Like, you have to have that sort of self-directed, goal-oriented mindset that's cultivated. And so, really, in short, like if somebody were to come up to you and ask you, what is metacognition? It's thinking about thinking, right? It refers to the internal processes that learners use to plan, monitor, and assess their own understanding. So it's not necessarily the what of learning, but the how and the why. And then there are two, this is how it's described, is that there are two areas of critical awareness that has to take place for metacognitive thinking to take place. And that's having a critical awareness of your own thinking and learning. So you understand what strategies work for you, understand what gaps are becoming present while you're in the process of thinking and learning, and how to adapt to those, but also a critical awareness of oneself as a thinker and a learner. You have to be engaged in your learning as a thinker and a learner. Can't just happen to you, right? You have to be an active participant, which builds a sense of ownership and identity around learning. And all of this is essential for lifelong learning, learner autonomy, not only in learning spaces, but really just out in the world. And so, in a nutshell, when we gain and how this relates to our instructional practices is when we engage metacognitively, we strengthen the ability to transfer knowledge. It's not just that you learn it once and you're done, but you take that learning with you and you adapt it to new contexts, tasks that you've never done before, maybe unexpected challenges that may come up. And it also deepens our self-awareness. It helps us to recognize our strengths and limitations, which leads to more of a growth mindset. And it invites us to ask ourselves questions like, what do I already know about this? What do I still need to know to understand? Where am I stuck? Why am I stuck? Which sort of reframes the limits of our knowledge, not as failures. I mean, we hear this all the time. When you fail, I think I had heard first attempt in learning, it's an opportunity to grow. But it also builds resilience and supports the development of higher order thinking skills like analysis, synthesis, evaluation. So instead of passively absorbing content, we begin to actively engage and interrogate content, and we engage with it more deeply. All of this aids in self-regulation, right? The ability to monitor our learning in real time, recognize when something isn't working. I do this all the time in my personal life. I read a lot professionally, but when I join a hobby-based book club, I always say I'm going to read the book. And I start reading the book and I'm like, no, this isn't going to work because I need to go on a walk. I need to listen. And I always switch to an audiobook because I know that that's what's going to keep me engaged. So the ability to recognize those things. And again, it's not just a learning skill. It's a life skill that you can bring into different areas of your life. And all of this combined is what makes metacognition a foundational pillar of learner-centered instruction. And when we center the learner, we take our first critical step towards making our learning experiences more accessible, inclusive, and impactful for everyone that we support. So now we're going to go through, we've sort of got a baseline for metacognition, how it relates to sort of building and cultivating instruction and education. But we'll look, I'm not going to go into a deep dive with this, but we're going to just do an overview of the Universal Design for Learning guidelines, or I'll refer to them as UDL guidelines. And really the purpose of these guidelines is to support learning practitioners in applying universal design for learning to improve their teaching and improve learning for all individuals. They're always changing. They're always refined based on feedback, research. So what I'm referencing today was finalized last July of last year. So this is UDL 3.0. And in those resources that I'll be sending out, I have a link to these as well. And so, like I said, I'm not going to cover every detail, but we'll go through a high level overview. And then I'll focus in on those guidelines that are most directly supported by metacognitive strategies. So, UDL encourages us to design for multiple means of engagement, right? You see this this top area over here, the first area from the left, the green space, if you're able to see. Optimizing choice and autonomy, right? Providing action-oriented feedback, promoting opportunities for reflection. Those are ways in which we can design for multiple means of engagement. It calls for multiple means of representation, supporting different ways to perceive information, using varied media to illustrate concepts, connecting new learning to prior knowledge. And finally, emphasizes designing for multiple means of action and expression. So, offer varied methods for response and navigation, um, offer opportunities to help learners set meaningful goals, encourage planning and anticipation of challenges. So, those are sort of the core, some core guidelines of the UDL framework. Now, when we look at the web content accessibility guidelines, I say WCAG. I don't know if it's right. If anybody knows, please put it phonetically in the chat. Again, these are revised regularly. And so, perfect, Sandy. I feel validated. These are the 2.2. This is the 2.2 version I'll be working from. But really, the web content accessibility guidelines, they define how to make web content more accessible to people with disabilities. Now, we know accessibility encompasses a broad spectrum, including visual, auditory, physical, speech, cognitive, language, learning, and neurological differences. And so WCAG addresses a wide variety and a wide range of needs, but it's important to note that no single set of guidelines can account for every type, degree, combination of disability, but these significantly enhance usability. So when we're thinking about instructional design, think about the tools that you use to develop your e-learning content, your videos, all of that stuff. And again, I won't talk through every guideline. If you've looked through these, you'll know that that would take days. But I'll provide, again, in the same way as I did with UDL, we'll do an overview of the core principles, and then I'll highlight what to consider when you're designing with metacognition in mind. So when we design with metacognition in mind, it gives us these examples of different activities we can incorporate. But then we'll talk about, all right, well, then what do I need to consider from a WCAG perspective? So the four foundational principles of the web content accessibility guidelines say that content must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So what we mean by perceivable is that information and user interface components must be presented in ways all users can perceive. For operable, interface components must be, the navigation must be usable and operable for everybody. Information and the operation of the interface must be clear and predictable. So all users must be able to understand the information presented and the way to use it, the way to engage with it. And for robust, content must be reliably interpreted by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. If any one of these principles is not met, the content is not fully accessible. So while metacognitive strategies aren't designed to fulfill WCAG requirements directly, they can serve as a meaningful example of how these principles like clarity, flexibility, user control can be thoughtfully applied in your instructional design. So that was a lot. I want everybody to kind of pause and, given this overview of UDL, metacognition, WCAG, At this point in time, how confident are you in your ability to design accessible learning experiences? Are you one, not yet confident, two, somewhat confident, three, very confident, four, or I'm sorry, three confident, four, very confident? Again, you can chat. I've seen some folks have put in the chat, or just notate it for yourself because we're going to want to check back in later to see if we're able to progress. All right, so let's take a look. Now we're going to move on to, we've looked at what metacognition is. We've got a high level overview of two of the main sort of applications for accessibility with UDL and WCAG. So now let's look at some examples of instructional practices that we can begin to embed in our learning spaces that will help to drive us towards creating more inclusive and accessible learning environments. So one item is goal setting, right? It can take many different forms. It can be a pre-learning worksheet, a digital prompt, a warm-up exercise that invites you to set a personal intention. May sound familiar. But these practices, they help to gain clarity of expectations. They help to build executive function, right? Like, how do I know if I'm going to engage with this course or this session, how do I know what I want to focus most on, right? Like I need to have a way to be able to, maybe I know a lot about one thing that's going to be presented in a course or a session, but there are other things that I want to know more about. How will I know what to focus on unless I set appropriate and realistic goals ahead of time? You can add goal setting activities at the start of a session or a module. You can ask learners to reflect on what they hope to take away, and then prompt them to revisit these goals during and after the experience so that they can assess like what their progress is towards different things or identify areas for further growth. When we think about like the ways in which we design our education, you can also embed goal setting into like interactive scenarios or system simulations to personalize the learning experience. So it might not necessarily be about like what they want to focus on from like a growth perspective, but like what experience do I want and how is that tied to my own personal goals? So when we encourage learners to set like a pre-simulation intention, we give them the opportunity to identify what they want to focus on. Maybe I want to focus on objection handling in the sales module because I already know what products are available. Or maybe I want to focus on building rapport because that's where I'm struggling. So it not only increases engagement, but it can be used to branch learners into a tailored experience that's aligned to their individual goals and needs. You can also integrate goal setting into product demos or system walkthroughs, again, enhancing personalization and learner agency. So one example is you can prompt them to set a personal focus before a demo around what they want to learn and accomplish. And I know when we think about like realistically incorporating this, like you think of like, oh, a storyline block with a text field and how am I going to get that information? It's less about you being able to get that information and more about the learner engaging in the activities and cultivating more agency and engagement for themselves. Like these can be successful without you ever seeing what goal they input, right? You can include a wrap-up activity that invites learners to reflect on their progress towards the goals, which again reinforces that self-awareness and encourages a deeper learning through intentional reflection. So when we look at the UDL guidelines, right, we know goal setting supports planning and self-regulation. Some things to look out for, right, when you're incorporating goal setting is that when it comes to UDL standards, 6.1, right, asks that we set meaningful goals. That's a very clear alignment, but we encourage learners to set goals that are meaningful and appropriately challenging and achievable, right, to build that ownership. 6.4, we and calls for enhanced capacity for monitoring progress. So anytime we can prompt learners to check in on their goals, that fosters reflection, adjustment. 7.1, it's a little less direct, but by allowing learners to define and pursue their own goals gives them a sense of control, which supports autonomy, helps them be more engaged and attached to the work that they're doing. 8.1, effective goal setting really helps learners understand the purpose behind the learning experience, and it can clarify what success looks like. Goal setting is particularly beneficial for some neurodiverse learners who thrive with structure and clarity. Any learners that are experiencing anxiety or stress and that will feel more confident with defined and manageable objections, and really anyone who is building self-regulation skills, which are essential for lifelong learning in or out of the learning space. Clarity is a form of accessibility. So using plain language in goal setting prompts ensures that learners with cognitive disabilities, dyslexia, limited English proficiency, or really anyone that doesn't want to think too hard about like setting goals. So instead of saying something like articulate a performance aligned objective relevant to your learning path, like you don't need to do all that. Just say, what do you want to learn today? What do you want to achieve today? What do you want to get out of this experience? Another thing is that not everyone feels confident expressing goals on the spot. Um, so offering like an example, like a sample of what a goal could look like, or sentence stems like, I want to better understand, and then they kind of fill in the blank, that can reduce cognitive load that could come with goal setting. I like this is personal for me because I feel like there's like an expectation of what the goal should be for some reason, even though it's like, no, it's just open for you to sort of say however you feel. So it's really helpful for people like me, and I know there are many others. And for some people, yeah, like those who are anxious or unsure or like need time to warm up a little bit, being able to skip and revisit a goal setting activity respects autonomy and accessibility. So maybe it's like okay, skip for now, or I'm not sure yet. And then later on in the module or the session, you kind of prompt them to like, okay, are you ready now to sort of set that goal? So these, while not like exactly, you see no numbers on this slide, right? These are just WCAG considerations and things that when we do this, when we design our activities in this way, we are honoring those WCAG considerations lots of times without even knowing it. Second, reflection prompts. They're very much like goal setting prompts, so I won't go too in depth, but they're an effective way to encourage metacognition. When you integrate, anytime you integrate reflective questions throughout a learning experience, you kind of create a low pressure space for people to stop and pause and process ideas so that they can deepen their understanding and in a lot of ways support knowledge transfer. Um, they invite people to think critically, right, about maybe what they just learned or what they're going to learn and make meaningful connections. Reflection prompts can be incredibly impactful in digital learning spaces too, like simulations or product demos. Um, So I'm imagining like a sort of safe interactive simulation. Maybe it's like a sales simulation where it's like, okay, how would you respond? And they choose how they would respond, and it would take them to another area. And it's like maybe pausing that and saying, why did you choose that? Right or wrong? Just allows for that deeper learning, right? And you can incorporate those like before the simulation, during, like after they've made a key decision, or maybe even after. And just like with simulations, you can add quick reflection prompts after key points are covered in like a demo, a product or a technology demo. Um, some good ones are like, how would you explain this to someone who's new? or like if it's a new process that a customer may have to, or a workflow that a customer may have to go through, having them pause and reflect on what might be confusing for the customer will sort of help get to a higher level of learning. Um, and when used intentionally, reflection prompts help learners become more self aware, more strategic about how they want to not only engage in the learning right there, but how they want to apply that outside of the learning space. Um, but when we look at the UDL guidelines, right, that asks us to build fluencies with graduated support, reflection prompts, like I said, they give us a place to pause, to process, to apply. And over time, this builds a sense of fluency, not just in the subject matter, but in how they think about their own learning. So maybe the next time they engage in a learning experience where there isn't a reflection prompt, they might just stop and reflect on themselves because now that's a habit that they've built that is used to deepen thinking. 6.2, allowing opportunities for learners to anticipate and plan for challenges. So when you ask them to reflect on what worked, what didn't work, that helps them to plan more effectively when they're actually doing the thing in real life. Supports executive functioning, as we mentioned, and cognitive flexibility. Like if we're only if we're teaching like system navigation or simulations in just a linear way, when they get out in the real world, 9 times out of 10, that process is not going to unfold in that linear way. So allowing them to be more flexible around how they're thinking about things, which can be especially valuable for some neurodiverse learners. 6.4 helps learners to track their growth. Again, same as goal setting. When we revisit earlier responses and compare progress over time, you engage in a sort of like metacognitive loop, right? That I had, this is what I thought at this point in time, and I moved through. Now I'm going to think about how I thought then and how I'm thinking now and sort of do a comparison. 8.1, right? Clarify the meaning and purpose of goals. So incorporating prompts like, how did today's activity help you meet your learning goal? So maybe you have one place where you've had them sort of set some goals for whatever they're engaging in. Now, how did what you've learned now help you to meet that goal? It sort of reinforces the relevance of the experience and helps learners to connect the outcome to the work that they've done, which is an incredibly powerful motivator. And then finally, promotes individual and collective reflection. That's probably the most obvious alignment, but ultimately, when we embed reflection into learning design across formats and modalities, we're sort of not, it's not just meant to reinforce content. I see it all the time where it's like they do a thing and it's like, what did you do? It's really meant to cultivate habits of mind, to help learners think critically, help them adapt, help them to grow, and then take that with them. Like we don't want that to stay in the learning space. We want them to take that with them. And just like goal setting, reflection prompts should be simple, direct, free of jargon. Clear language makes it easier for learners of all abilities, but especially cognitive disabilities, dyslexia, anybody learning in a second language to fully engage. Because when we're asking people to slow down and think deeply, I mean, the last thing that we need to, that they should be thinking deeply about is like the question that you're asking them. So it's also important to remember that reflection isn't one size fits all. Some folks process best by speaking, some prefer writing. So it's important to offer flexible options like text fields, or maybe you can have them record and upload, whatever's available, obviously. But anytime you can allow folks to reflect in ways that align with their communication and processing styles is advancing accessibility. And finally, don't overlook small details, right? Like I completed the assessment or the reflection and I don't know whether it's saved, right? So like a simple message like your reflection's been saved provides reassurance, which especially for learners with memory or attention differences. Anybody experiencing stress, like have you ever been like, oh, you didn't do this education and you have to do it now, it's got to be done today. um, Really anyone who wants to stay focused on the learning and not worry about whether technology did what it was supposed to do. And of course, the confirmation should be delivered as this. It can be a screen reader friendly pop up, it can be an audio alert, it can be both. Um, just it's important to include those things. Our next instructional practice, think-alouds and modeling. So, think-alouds and modeling can be very powerful metacognitive strategies. They essentially make invisible thinking visible. So, anytime you're demonstrating how to approach a problem, how to complete a task, or analyze a scenario while verbalizing the thought process behind it, um, is incredibly useful. It's especially helpful for learners with any processing or attention needs, as you're providing a clear and structured way to follow and internalize those cognitive strategies. So you could consider modeling errors. So, like, what happens if I do this thing, or what happens when I get this error, and kind of talking through that, and walking through and talking through the revision process. So, like, what happens when I do that, and how do I fix it? That helps to normalize mistakes. It helps to highlight problem solving strategies. It helps to sort of reinforce that this is a safe space for learning. Shadowing opportunities where learners can observe and reflect on, like, an expert or somebody that's proficient in the task, what their decision making and thought process is like, and explaining the why during systems training. Not just like, so you click here and then you click here and then like, why did I click here? Why did I move through this? There's also like those watch then do exercises. I feel like in Storyline, these were super popular like 10 years ago or so, because I feel like you could build that scaffold of like, it's like a demo and then they can try. I forget what they're called, but anytime where someone can observe a modeled task, then try it and then reflect on the experience. And then also something I call a reverse think aloud, where you're watching an example of someone completing a task or going through a system demo, and analyze their own decision making of why you think they did XYZ or moved through that in a particular way. So these not only support metacognition, but also promote learner agency, critical thinking, deeper engagement. Whew, let's slow down. UDL guidelines. So where these align most to our UDL guidelines, 5.2 asks that we use multiple tools for construction, composition, and creativity. So anytime we're modeling, we help learners see, and sometimes depending on the job, I mean, if thinking of like customer service and sales professionals, they have like multiple systems up at one time. So being able to see, like, not only how I have a sales conversation, not only how I navigate the system, not only how I like input notes, but how do all of those systems and tools react and interact with one another, and how do I interact with them all at the same time? Anticipate and plan for challenges, right? Think alouds can be really powerful in planning and problem solving. So, like we said, narrating your decision making, explaining why you chose one option over the other. That helps learners build their own internal strategies, right? Um, for example, in a sales training, like, I'm going to ask this question here to uncover the customer's needs. Maybe it's at a certain part in the system, right, that you would want to ask that question. 6.3, right, organize information and resources. So in more heavily complex tasks, learners need to uh, understand and know how to manage multiple pieces of information. And so modeling how to organize that data and compare data and options or how to prioritize steps, like really help learners understand how to manage like the cognitive load that that system or process may give them. 3.3, cultivate multiple ways of knowing and making meaning. So think-alouds are really great at guiding learners in how to process and make sense of information, verbalizing insights like, I'm noticing a pattern here, so I may do this. It really helps to um, helps us scaffold comprehension, right? And supports learners in filtering. And then, of course, 8.1, clarify the meaning and purpose of goals. Like, I feel like with all these activities, we're always going back to those goals that we wanted to set at the beginning. So saying, I'm choosing this response because it helps build trust with the client, which is one of our key objectives of this activity, right? It reinforces the why behind the action, behind the learning experience, which can be incredibly motivating. And so we're looking at how incorporating think-alouds can really drive that understanding of our WCAG considerations. When you incorporate them in online learning specifically, you have to ensure that you're honoring inclusivity. And so if I complete a task, right, after observing a model, I want feedback, right? Not just on whether I got it right, but on how clear my approach was, or what next steps I can take, or what additional information that may drive forward my learning via the feedback. If I make an error, right, if I click the wrong spot, or if I choose the wrong talk path, any guidance that is given in the feedback should be kind, it should be clear, and it should be actionable. I think the worst experience is like, oh, that was wrong, or you got that wrong, or a big fat X with a buzzer sound, but then you didn't tell me what I could have done to do better, I think is a missed opportunity. And so also, you could consider adding additional learning opportunities. So, like, say there's an embedded quiz and you want to give a chance to retry always, right? Multiple chances is incredibly important when we're trying to cultivate that safe space. But also, maybe there's some follow-up resources you can provide so that learners can apply what they've learned and continue to build their confidence. Self-assessments. I'm going to start going kind of fast because we're getting towards the end, but self-assessments, they're incredibly valuable to help learners gauge their progress. Many forms of self-assessments can be like a progress or an end of module checklist, a self-rating scale to assess comfort or confidence with skills or content. You can even put this ahead of a simulation or ahead of a demo to sort of help prep learners on what to focus on. But essentially, it gives a way to reflect on where they are and what they need, and it promotes ownership, right? Like, if I know that I need to work on X and I've sort of attested to that, that tells me that I need to focus on X in the learning environment, which again supports that executive functioning and really can enhance the overall learning experience. Self-assessments kind of are the cornerstone of metacognitive learning design, and they align very seamlessly to the UDL framework, right? They empower learners to reflect on their progress, recognize strengths and gaps, take ownership over the journey and what they want to focus on. So some of the same things that we've seen already with some of the other activities, they help learners set and adjust their personal goals. So maybe my goals were this in like module 1 of this course, but maybe my goals have shifted by the time I get to module 5 because of that self-assessment that I've done in between. Rubrics, checkpoints, comparative reviews, anything that helps a learner track their growth over time builds that metacognitive awareness and supports in more self-regulation of learning. Again, anytime a learner can connect their performance to outcomes, they better understand the relevance of the learning experience. So maybe even adding a prompt to a self-assessment, like how did this activity help you meet your goal, just sort of reinforces that. The most direct link, right, is probably guideline 9.3 that says prompt individual and collective reflection, right? Structured reflection helps learners evaluate their progress and build lifelong learning skills. So when we look at the WCAG considerations, we've already said this, but complex or academic language, it just creates barriers, right? Again, don't say articulate your degree of competency in X. How confident do you feel in doing X? How confident do you feel in doing Y? Super important. Small, I think effort, huge impact. Clear labeling, right? It's like more than clarity, right? It's about being able to access. So like trying to think of an activity where, okay, maybe it's like complete the questions below and you've got like a whole tick box of answers that you can choose from, but not once anywhere did you say that this is a select all. Like it should never be up to the learner to try to guess how they should be engaging in an activity. So instructions like select all that apply, or choose your level of agreement, or choose the one best answer. However you want to phrase it, make sure that there's clear labeling and clarity. Learners with cognitive disabilities, English language learners, anyone unfamiliar with the tool, right? Like there's constantly new e-learning technology getting put out there, and not everybody is experienced and not everybody knows how to use it. So that's a big one. And then offering multiple ways to respond, like maybe I want to choose, maybe choosing from a Likert scale, or recording an audio reflection, or a typed written response. Just it allows learners to engage in ways that align with their communication and preferences and processing styles. It might be a little bit of work on our end, right? Like it'd be really nice to just be able to download like a spreadsheet of all the responses, and it makes it a little more complicated if I have some written responses in there too. But think about the gains that we get with offering that flexibility. Speaking of flexibility, offer choice, right? Offering learners choice in format and engagement pathways that honors diverse processing styles, energy levels, preferences. And when learners can decide how to interact with content and how to, they're more likely to stay engaged, right? And more empowered in their learning. So consider incorporating like interactive branching scenarios. We talked about this a couple slides back, but any way in which we can personalize the learning. You can uh, offer optional deeper reflection activities. So maybe like really to get the point across and to measure learning and all of that, you only need to do XYZ, but somebody may want to do something after, like, so have downloadable reflection activities or activity templates for them to sort of take with them and continue learning. And as always, offering alternate modes of engagement and navigation, such as video, audio, text. If you have certain activities in there that are not fully accessible because the tool isn't fully accessible, offer another way to engage, not only for accessibility for people with disabilities, but like maybe people just don't, they'd rather engage in a different way. So this can also be built in either synchronous and asynchronous learning, right? One big one for like live facilitated sessions is allowing learners to choose the breakout rooms that they want to go into. So building activities where there's a little more flexibility in how they want to engage and what they want to learn. And then, as we mentioned, like any way to personalize the learning, branching scenarios, selecting different roles or perspectives, that offers choice and flexibility. And these are completely aligned with the UDL guidelines, right? By the use of multiple media for communication, 5.1, 5.2, which we've already seen. They should have options and how to demonstrate understanding, whether it's through writing, video, um, that flexibility just supports creativity and self expression as well. 7.1, optimizing individual choice and autonomy. That's like the heart of learner choice when we provide options. And 7.2, optimize relevance, right? When I can tailor my experience, the the learning experience becomes more relevant to me. And then when we're thinking in terms of WCAG, right? Anytime we're presenting learner choices using icons, images, custom visuals, we talked about this at the beginning with some of y'all's input in the chat, but we always want to ensure that screen readers can accurately describe the options so that anyone using assistive technology is not guessing what they're engaging with. So alt text becomes incredibly important. And every interactive element, whether it's a button, a menu, a branching scenario, it must be fully navigable with a keyboard. You should be able to tab through and make selections and move through the experience without needing a mouse. And as you tab through, there should be a clear visual indicator, like a border or a highlight. I know some of the e-learning tools have this embedded if you have them, if you have it turned on. But I should know where I'm at, right, as I'm tabbing through, because it's very easy to lose track. And then also tab orders, they should follow the logical sequence, right? So if you're asking people to complete something up and down or left to right, the tab order should follow that. And when offering choices, be explicit about what an option means, right? I've seen this a lot where it's like to the left, there's one particular tool where you can put text in the left, and it's like, if you want to learn more about X, and then to the right, it's just like a button that says go. Say, watch the video here, access the resource here. Don't just say go. Make sure that you're explicit with labeling. And then finally, this isn't just a tool for you to design experiences, right? Using metacognitive thinking to evaluate what you've designed is also extremely valuable. So set goals around what you hope your activities, your courses, your sessions should achieve, and track your progress towards those goals and revise and iterate your content based on that. Reflect on how your webinar or your class went. Take those reflections and into you with your planning or with into you with your revisions, and assess yourself, right? If you have goals for the kind of learning designer, facilitator, teacher that you want to be, use self-assessments on yourself to understand how close you are. Talk through your own processes with yourself, right? Understand, like if you chose to recommend an e-learning module over a webinar, or you designed a video instead of a one-pager, talk through that. Because I know with experience that we often get caught up in routines, or like, oh, I did this video for this and it's kind of the same, so I'm going to do a video again. That's a think aloud, right? But sometimes we get caught up in these routines of what we've done in the past, and we it's not necessarily, we don't necessarily think about what fits best in a particular case. And offer yourself flexibility when and where you can in choice. So maybe you deliver the same content over and over. Maybe you're less engaged as a result of it. Honor your authenticity, challenge yourself with choice. And I'll allow you a minute now to check in with yourself, right? Earlier, I asked you, what do you hope to get out of this session? Check in with yourself. How much progress have you made towards your goal, right? Reassess how confident you are in your ability to design accessible learning experiences, right? I definitely don't claim to be an expert. It is an area that I'm interested in, and you know, would love to talk about, love to research about, but there's so much more that I have to learn. And so if you didn't meet your goal, or you didn't move with regard to the confidence scale, like keep engaging in conferences like these, network with folks that study and research in this area. And again, feel free, you can put your check-in on your goal or your self-assessment in the chat if you like, or just compare it to what you wrote down earlier. If you still have questions, like I said, or you didn't gain what you're hoping to, don't stop engaging. Use metacognitive strategies within your own planning and development. And with that, I thank you all for your time, for your thoughtful engagement in the chat. My hope is that next time you're asked what comes to mind when you think of accessibility, that maybe you'll say metacognition, or you'll talk about one of the instructional practices we talked today. So, like I said, I put a toolkit together. You'll be getting that after, I would assume after the conferences. Luis will get that to you. And I hope today's session sparked some new ideas and you got some useful tools to take back with you.
Sarah, thank you so much. It was
Thanks.
absolutely fantastic. You almost went like the full hour, and there
I
was,
know.
I honestly did not want to like stop you at any point because you were just going point after point after point that were really, really relevant. And I apologize to everyone that may have had something in the chat that I could have brought up, but I do think that that Sarah was just on a roll, and it was fantastic. This will be an incredible resource to share with folks, and I do hope that everyone got a lot out of it. And once it is out there, please feel free to share. Sarah, you're amazing. This is great stuff. Thank you.
Thanks.
Very inspiring too, just the level that you took this. Thank you so much. I
Thanks for
did,
having me.
yeah, I did post Sarah's LinkedIn URL in the chat if you're interested in just I don't know if you do much on LinkedIn, Sarah, but I don't know, the link is there regardless. And yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks.
yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, close out the webinar. Don't forget tomorrow we have two more sessions, and then we close the event out on Thursday. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We'll see you next time.